Chronigma.
Sometimes you get that feeling, don't you? That the history we learn, well, it might just be scratching the surface.
Mm-hmm. Like there are whole chapters missing.
Exactly. Hidden stories, forgotten knowledge. Maybe just waiting for someone to stumble upon them again.
It's a tantalizing thought.
And today we're diving headfirst into one of those really intriguing possibilities. Did ancient explorers, centuries before we officially found it, actually know about Antarctica?
Just think about that. Antarctica, known way back when.
It's just your whole perspective, right?
Right.
What if the world map we've always accepted, well, isn't the full story?
It's a truly captivating question. And for us today, it really boils down to one key piece of evidence. The Piri Reis map, made in 1513.
Wait, 1513, that's early.
Very early. It's an Ottoman naval chart, early 16th century.
Yeah.
And what makes it so stunning and really kicks off this whole debate is that it's the oldest detailed map we have that actually shows the American continent.
Wow. How long after Columbus?
Just 21 years after Columbus first reached the New World. Suddenly, boom, here's this map showing coastlines across the Atlantic. It makes you wonder, how? What did they know?
Exactly. That's the hook, isn't it? And the really mind-bending part for this deep dive, the claim we need to investigate, is that the landmass shown way down south isn't just a weirdly drawn South America. Some argue it could actually be Antarctica. But get this, an ice-free Antarctica.
Okay, now that's a claim.
Right. So our mission today, kind of like historical detectives, is to really unpack this. We're going to look closely at the map, figure out who Piri Reis was, where he got his information, and, try to figure out what this incredible document is actually telling us.
Sounds like a plan. So let's start with the man himself. Who exactly was Piri Reis?
Good starting point. Okay, so Piri Reis, he wasn't just some random map maker. He was actually a pretty big deal. An Ottoman admiral, a respected cartographer.
A naval guy.
Yeah, born in Gallipoli, probably late 1400s. Grew up at sea, basically. Sailed with his uncle, Piri Reis, who was a major figure in the Ottoman Navy from the 1490s on. They saw action, naval battles, the whole deal.
So a seasoned mariner. But what's interesting, especially for our investigation, is that this famous 1513 map, it wasn't based on his own travels, was it?
No, that's crucial. He's quite upfront about it, actually. He notes right on the map that he compiled it, pulled it together from loads of different sources.
Think of him less as the explorer, more as the integrator, the compiler of geographic intelligence, if you like.
That's a great way to put it. He mentions using about 20 charts in Mappamundi.
And Mappamundi back then weren't quite like our maps, right? More like worldviews.
Yeah, exactly. Often mixed geography with history, myths, religion. Not always geographically precise in our sense. He also lists 8 Jaffaris, which scholars think might be linked to Ptolemy's Geographia or similar Islamic works, plus an Arabic map of India, 4 fairly recent Portuguese maps showing Asia. And here's the kicker for the Antarctica theory, maybe. A map by Christopher Columbus himself, showing the West Indies.
Ah, the Columbus connection. That's always a big part of this story.
Definitely. And Piri Reis' story doesn't end there. He became a commander himself later on, sailed the Red Sea, the Indian Ocean.
And he made other maps too, didn't he? A later world map, though only a bit of it survives. And that sailing manual.
The Kitab-e-Barai, yeah, a really important navigation guide. But it's that 1513 map with its supposed link to Columbus and this potential pre-discovery knowledge that really captured people's imaginations later on.
And the rediscovery itself is kind of a cool story. It was just sitting in the Topkapi Palace in Istanbul.
Yeah. Basically lost or forgotten until 1929. They were turning the palace into a museum, and this German theologian, Gustav Deismann, was involved in cataloging things.
Right place, right time.
Pretty much. He was keen on preserving old manuscripts, and during that process, boom, there's this map fragment, almost found by accident.
Yeah, incredible. And when experts looked at it, this map on gazelle skin.
The Orientalist Paul Colley identified it as Piri Reis's work, and specifically pointed out the mention of that Columbus source map.
And think about this, Columbus's own original maps. They're gone. Poof, lost to time.
So suddenly, this Ottoman map becomes potentially the only surviving glimpse of how Columbus himself first mapped the New World.
Exactly. The idea that a piece of a lost Columbus map survived, copied onto this chart, well, it caused a huge stir. Academics got excited, and later, people interested in, let's say, alternative histories really latched onto it.
Okay, so we have Piri Reis, the Admiral compiler, and the map's intriguing rediscovery. Let's zoom in on the map itself now. What are we actually looking at? What would our investigators see?
Okay, so the piece we have, it's about a third of the original world map. Drawn on gazelle skin parchment, like you said, it mainly shows the Atlantic Ocean. You've got the coasts of Europe, Africa, and the eastern edge of South America pretty clearly.
Yet it's a specific type of map, right? A borderland chart.
Yes, exactly. Designed for sailors. So instead of the latitude and longitude grid we're used to, it has these compass roses with lines, rum lines radiating out. Sailors used these to plot courses before they could accurately figure out longitude at sea. Very practical.
And it's not just coastlines, is it? There's writing all over it.
Oh yeah, loads of notes. Mostly in Ottoman Turkish, using the Arabic script. There's also a colophon, like an inscription, probably by Piri Reis himself in Arabic. These notes are gold mines. They talk about places who lived there, sometimes the sources he used.
Okay, let's focus on the Americas part. You said South America is surprisingly accurate.
For 1513, yes. The eastern bulge of Brazil and its relationship to the African coast, for instance, is shown reasonably well. But then you look northwest, towards the Caribbean, and things get weird.
Weird how?
Well, Cuba and parts of Central America seem kind of smushed together into one big distorted landmass. It doesn't look right compared to modern maps.
And this is where that Columbus fingerprint comes in again,
Yeah,
right?
precisely. Most scholars think this weird Caribbean depiction is a direct echo of a lost Columbus map. Remember, Columbus initially thought he'd reached Asia.
Ah, right. He thought Cuba was part of the Asian mainland.
Exactly. And maybe Hispaniola was Cipango, Japan from Marco Polo's accounts. So the Piri Reis map likely captures that early mistaken understanding from Columbus's first voyages. You even find place names on that part of the map that match records from Columbus's explorations along Cuba names you don't see on other maps from that time. It's like a fossil record of Columbus's initial confusion.
Okay, so we've got a reasonably good South America for the era, a wonky Caribbean reflecting Columbus's early ideas. And then we move south, down the Atlantic coast. This is where the mystery really heats up for our investigation. What's shown there?
Well, the coastline continues south, and this southern landmass is often interpreted as some version of Terra Australis.
Terra Australis Incognita, the unknown southern land.
That's the one. The idea of a giant southern continent to balance the northern ones was a common theory back then, going back to the ancient Greeks. Maps often included it purely speculatively.
But the big question for us, the core of this deep dive, is whether Piri Reis's depiction is more than just speculation. Is it more than just another drawing of Terra Australis? Could it be real land, specifically Antarctica, but without the ice?
And that right there is the million-dollar question. Is it really Antarctica?
Let's tackle it head on. What does the evidence say?
Well, look, the idea is incredibly romantic, isn't it? Ancient knowledge, lost maps. It's captured imaginations for decades. But that 20th century theory, the one saying this map shows an ice-free Antarctica, within mainstream history and science, it's pretty much been debunked.
Debunked. How so? Where did the idea even come from?
It really got going with a guy named Captain Arlington H. Mallory. He was an engineer, an amateur archaeologist, really interested in pre-Columbian contact theories. He tried replotting the map's coordinates using a different grid system and argued the shapes looked like Antarctica's coastline beneath the ice. Then, historian Charles Hapgood picked it up and ran with it in his book, Maps of the Ancient Sea Kings in 1966. That book was huge.
Hapgood's theory. What was his angle? If we're investigating, we need to understand his argument.
Hapgood went big. He proposed a whole lost pre-classical civilization, sophisticated navigators, map makers, wiped out by some catastrophe, but their maps survived, copied down through the ages.
And Piri Reis somehow got hold of one of these ancient copies.
That was Hapgood's claim. He used the Piri Reis map and others as proof. Interestingly, though, even Hapgood admitted there were inconsistencies. He even suggested Piri Reis himself didn't really understand the ancient map he was supposedly copying.
The originator of the theory admitting problems. That's a bit of a red flag for our investigators, surely.
You'd think so, and it raises the question, what are the big problems with the Antarctica theory? What did Hapgood maybe overlook or downplay?
Okay, let's break down the counter-evidence. What argues against it being Antarctica?
There are quite a few points, actually. First, basic geography on the map itself. The furthest south point we can actually identify with certainty is the Brazilian coast around Canania. It's labeled Catino.
So nothing reliably identified further south than Brazil.
Correct. And the notes Piri Reis wrote on the map in that southern area, they talk about the climate getting hot, mention large snakes, things that fit South America, not Antarctica, even an ice-free one.
What about the shape? The proponents always talk about the resemblance to this subglacial topography.
Right, but that's where it gets shaky. The historian Svat Suchek pointed out the parchment itself is curved and distorted down there, and mapmakers back then often had to stretch or squash coastlines just to make them fit the piece of animal skin they were working on.
Okay, so it could just be artistic license or fitting the page.
Could be. And Diego Koji, an art historian, made another good point. Piri Reis said he used Portuguese maps. Portuguese maps from that time exploring Brazil would likely show the coast curving eastward, maybe exaggeratedly so. That could easily explain the shape we see. It's just how they were drawing Brazil back then.
Not some lost map of Antarctica.
Yeah.
And those snakes you mentioned.
Yeah, the notes mention large snakes like Brur constrictors in that southern region. Those snakes live in South America, yes, but not way down in southern Patagonia, which is the closest bit to Antarctica. Again, points to South America, not the polar south.
What about modern science? Geology? Ice cores? Surely that tells us something.
Absolutely crucial. Modern geology, especially ice core data drilled deep into the Antarctic ice sheet, tells a very clear story. Antarctica has been covered by thick ice for millions of years.
Millions. Not just thousands.
Millions. Way, way longer than Hapgood's timeline, which suggested parts might have been ice-free only a few thousand years BC. That's just geologically impossible based on current evidence.
And even if, hypothetically, the ice was gone recently, would it look like the map?
Probably not. Scientists have modeled what an ice-free Antarctica would look like, considering isostatic rebound, the land bouncing back up after the immense weight of the ice is removed. The resulting shape doesn't show any significant resemblance to the Piri Reis map.
So the geology is pretty definitive against it. What about that seismic survey Hapgood used as evidence? The 1949 one.
Ah, yes, the seismic survey. Geologist Paul Heinrich looked into this. Turns out, Hapgood seems to have fundamentally misunderstood the data. He basically confused the map of the land under the ice, the subglacial topography, with what the land would look like without ice, which isn't the same thing because of the rebound effect.
Oh, okay, that's a major mix-up.
It is. Plus, that 1949 survey covered a tiny fraction less than 1% of the relevant Antarctic area. It just wasn't comprehensive enough to draw those kinds of conclusions. Later, much more detailed studies show no meaningful correlation between the Piri Reis map and Antarctica's actual shape, with or without ice.
Okay, so the Antarctic theory seems to crumble under scrutiny. If it's not Antarctica, then what was Piri Reis drawing down there? Where did that southern bit come from? Back to his sources.
Exactly, back to the sources he listed. Remember, around 20 charts, and Mappa Mundi, the Jaffaris, the Arabic map of India, those 4 Portuguese maps of Asia, and the Columbus map of the West Indies. Somewhere in that mix lies the answer.
And for our investigators, figuring out exactly what those sources were is key, right? There's still some debate.
There is. Did 20 charts and Mappa Mundi mean 20 plus the others he listed? Or was it an umbrella term for all the map sources, totaling around 20? Scholars differ, and identifying the exact Arabic and Portuguese maps he used is still ongoing work. Each one could have added a piece to the puzzle.
But that Columbus map seems central, doesn't it?
It really does, because, again, Columbus's own maps are lost. So Piri Reis gives us this incredibly valuable indirect window. Gregory McIntosh, who studied this map extensively, he argues very strongly that the Caribbean part of the map is like the earliest, most basic mapping of those islands we have anywhere. It strongly suggests Piri Reis was working directly from a very early Columbus map, maybe from 1495 or 1496, right after the first voyages.
Before Columbus even presented official maps back in Spain.
Possibly. The unique way the islands are drawn, the errors, it points to that very early stage of discovery and confusion. It's compelling evidence for that Columbian link.
That's pretty amazing when you think about it. An Ottoman admiral in Istanbul preserving details from a Genoese explorer's first, maybe rough, charts of the Americas. History works in weird ways.
It really does, and it shows how knowledge traveled, even then. Piri Reis was clearly open to using European sources, which wasn't always common in Islamic cartography at the time. He synthesized information from different worlds.
And he even included mythical creatures.
Yeah, down in South America, he drew things from medieval bestiaries, like Blemier headless men with faces on their chests and other strange beasts. But interestingly, he wrote an inscription saying these creatures are harmless souls.
Harmless souls.
Yeah, which historian Karen Pinto thinks is fascinating. It breaks from the older Islamic idea of the encircling ocean being full of impassable monsters. It shows maybe a new willingness to engage with the unknown, even the fantastical parts.
Okay, so our investigation shows the Antarctica claim is weak. The map reflects known sources like Columbus and maybe Portuguese charts, combined with Terra Australis speculation. But we can't ignore that the Antarctica idea did catch on, especially outside universities.
No, you can't. Writers like Eric von Daniken, Chariots of the Gods, and Graham Hancock, who writes about lost civilizations, they really embraced Hapgood's ideas.
Using the Piri Reis map as Exhibit A for ancient astronauts or Atlantis.
Pretty much. They often took Hapgood's claims uncritically, using the map as evidence for these grand theories, often ignoring the more mundane but better supported historical and cartographic explanations. It taps into that desire for a hidden, more exciting history.
It's a familiar pattern. So let's bring our investigation back to the mainstream. What do most historians and cartography experts say about that southern landmass today? What's the consensus?
The overwhelming consensus among scholars is that the southern landmass on the Piri Reis map is most likely just another depiction of the theoretical Terra Australis.
It's expected southern continent.
Exactly. That idea was standard on maps back then. Based on ancient Greek philosophy, Ptolemy thought there had to be land in the south to balance the north. So mapmakers drew it in, guessing at its shape. Piri Reis was likely doing the same.
So the shape on his map could just be his version of that imagined land, maybe influenced by rumors from early voyages, or just fitting it onto the page.
That covers the main interpretations. Maybe distorted by the edge of the parchment, maybe influenced by how the Portuguese were drawing South America stretching eastwards, maybe just filling the void based on the Terra Australis concept. The key takeaway for our investigation: there's no solid textual or historical evidence on the map itself to say it's Antarctica.
And the map, well, good for its time in some ways.
It was surpassed pretty quickly. As the 16th century went on, European exploration ramped up, map-making techniques improved, and much more accurate charts of the Americas and the Atlantic appeared. Piri Reis's map is a snapshot, a fascinating one, but just one step in that process.
So we've followed the clues, sifted the evidence. The idea of ancient explorers knowing Antarctica is incredibly compelling, a great mystery story. But our investigation of the Piri Reis map suggests the evidence just doesn't point that way.
Exactly. The map is still incredibly important, just not for that reason. Its real value lies elsewhere. It tells us so much about map-making in the 1500s, how the Ottoman world engaged with European discoveries, and crucially, it preserves echoes of Columbus's lost charts. That's its true significance. It shows us how the world was understood and misunderstood back then.
It really does make you think, though. Looking at that map with its mix of accurate coasts, theoretical lands, even mythical beasts, what does that tell us about how people 500 years ago saw their world? Its known edges, its vast unknowns, its possibilities.
A world still being pieced together where fact, theory, and even myth could coexist on the same parchment.
And maybe, just maybe, what other lost knowledge or different perspectives are still hiding in plain sight on old documents waiting for a fresh investigation?
That's the enduring allure of history, isn't it? Always the potential for another layer to uncover. The Piri Reis map might not show ancient Antarctica, but it definitely maps the fascinating landscape of the early modern mind trying to grasp a rapidly expanding world.
Well, thank you for joining me on this deep dive into the Piri Reis map and that really persistent question about ancient Antarctica. Hopefully it's given everyone something to think about.
Absolutely.
We definitely encourage you all to keep exploring these historical maps, the stories they tell, and all those amazing intersections between geography, history, exploration, and the mysteries that still remain.